Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about those top 10 teams. Who are they facing and what do we need to just see from those teams? Whether it's execution-wise, just an energy type thing. There's a lot at stake this upcoming weekend, but let's jump into the questions that I have going into this weekend. And there's a couple, and I want to start with one that is a little bit more convoluted, but are we going to leave this weekend with more answers or more questions? Because there's a lot of games around the country that can give us a lot of answers, that can weed out some teams, and we will get a couple of them. Tennessee, Alabama is going to give us an answer. It will tell us this team is probably in the SEC race, this team is in dire straits going forward. So that at the very least will separate that a little bit. UGA Texas is not quite as clean. If UGA ends up beating Texas, chaos ensues. I have no earthly idea who goes forward in the SEC. You'd have one of these teams towards the top with one loss. You'd have Texas with one loss. You'd have Georgia with one loss. It would be very, very confusing. But at the end of the day, if Texas won, you'd have a little bit more clarity in that SEC conference, and it'll be interesting to see that going forward. And then you got a number of other games. I think Nebraska-Indiana is another one to watch in that Big Ten because that's a pseudo-elimination game in that conference and in the CFP. So definitely one to watch there. But moving forward, then there are games like Arkansas and the SEC. If they get that win, a lot of things go crazy. West Virginia, if they beat Kansas State this upcoming weekend in the Big 12, I have no earthly idea where that goes. Illinois getting a win over Michigan in the Big 10 could catapult them forward into that conversation again. And then Louisville beating Miami would be absolutely crazy and would confuse the ACC. So it's one of those things that it could go either one of those ways. If Kansas State wins, if LSU wins, if Michigan wins, if Miami wins, I was blanking there for a second. If Miami wins that game, we'll have a lot more answers. No two ways about that. The sport in general will start to thin out a little bit. If it goes the other way, then we might just have a little bit of a problem on our hands. And then you got the upsets. You got Auburn if they beat Missouri. I have picked them to beat Missouri. If Mississippi State can somehow get A&M on the road. If Purdue somehow knocks off Oregon, which sounds crazy, but as we know, Friday in West Lafayette is a weird place. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of games that could kind of give us a little bit of clarity this week. But if they go the opposite direction, we could be coming back and having even less of an idea of how this season's going to go going forward. But the other thing I want to talk about, what's the most under-the-radar game of the week? And there's a lot to go to here. You know, huge marquee games, plenty of big-time conference matchups. But then there are these games, some smaller games that you might not be fully tuned into. SMU at Stanford is going to be a huge game. It's a very, very interesting one. Pretty much whenever Stanford gets on the field with a team that they should lose to, they're going to put up a fight. They're a very, very fun team. Ashton Daniels is playing really, really good football. And then on the other side, SMU is starting to look like a CFP is a real possibility for them going forward. So it's one of those things that you got to travel out west. Definitely some variables there for SMU, and maybe it's a little bit closer down the stretch than we're thinking. And then we got Notre Dame, Georgia Tech. This is a very interesting matchup for a number of reasons. And one of the bigger ones is Notre Dame has fallen on some hard times injury-wise. And especially Benjamin Morrison going down, that is a huge deal for this game because so much of what Georgia Tech likes to do is get their wide receivers out on the edge very quickly and let them run. You're losing one of the guys that's one of your more sure tacklers on the outside when you lose Benjamin Morrison. Now, still have Xavier Watts, so he can absolutely fly downfield and make plenty of plays, but it does open up a little bit more of a door for this Georgia Tech offense to get going. And then you got Notre Dame coming in, need this win, need every single win going forward if they want to make the CFP. If they fall in this one, feel very confident that they will not be in that 12-team playoff. And then we got Boston College, West Virginia. This might just be the winner for me. I think this is such an interesting game because neither of these teams are going to play in the ACC. Neither of these teams are going to be a big-time player in the CFP race. What they do have is two quarterbacks that I just love. I think Kyron Jones is so much fun. Thomas Castellanos on the other side is just as fun as well. It's going to be incredible to watch this one, and yeah, I think it's going to get a little wacky as well. So maybe it's one that might not be the cleanest played game in the world, but I promise you'll have some fun watching this one. And then who needs to make a big-time statement? Who is the coach, player, whatever, that needs to be the person that steps up the most? Kalen DeBoer might be the top of the list, if I'm being honest. And now the guy on the other side, Josh Heupel's got plenty on his plate as well this upcoming weekend. But Alabama fans, it feels like they're waiting. It feels like they are sharks in the water just waiting for that chum to be thrown. And this would be the game where if he loses it, plenty of chum is going to be thrown in the water, and they will come. So the reality is you got to be very careful. He's got to coach a really, really good football game here. He cannot be the reason that they lose this game, whether it's play calling offensively or decisions down the stretch, or Alabama fans are going to have a fit. That's the reality of the situation. We saw it after the Vanderbilt game. It would be very aggressive after this one as well. He's got to be able to execute, and it's a huge, huge game for him just perception-wise in Alabama going forward. And then we got to talk about Kirby Smart. This is a huge one in Austin, and frankly, there's a team that has not played very good football thus far. They have been all over the place. They haven't looked like a Kirby Smart football team. All of that changes on Saturday if they can execute. If they can go in and win that game, maybe by 10 points at Texas, none of that other stuff matters. You feel like you have the Georgia that we expected to see, and they're rolling downhill. So this is a huge one for them. Obviously for Texas, got to make a statement that you can not only belong in the SEC, but be the team to beat in the SEC. And then there's plenty of others. Nebraska, Indiana is going to be a really, really huge game, and definitely one where someone's got to make a big statement in that one. KSU, Kansas State can absolutely plant their flag this weekend. Colorado could bounce back in a huge way and get back into the fight, and so many more games that you just need that one big moment, whether it's a coach, whether it's a player, whether it's just a team in general. You need that one big moment, and it could totally change your season. And then we move on to the Group of 5 game of the week. This is something that I absolutely love to do because we'll give all the love in the world to the Power 4. I think everyone understands that. That's where the sport starts. But there's so many fun games, a little bit below us, so many talented players, a little bit below what we're watching on Saturday. So Western Kentucky, Sam Houston is one I want to start with, and it is tonight. So definitely tune in for that one. But an incredible matchup between these two teams that are really rolling right now. I think the quarterback matchup between Caden Veltkamp and Hunter Watson is going to be really, really fun to watch. Two guys that are very different. Hunter Watson, a little bit more of a dual threat guy. Caden Veltkamp likes to stand in there and make those throws. So it's going to be a fun matchup. I would lean Western Kentucky, but I don't know. Don't feel very confident. Sam Houston's playing really, really good football right about now. Toledo, Northern Illinois is going to be a huge one as well in this one. These are the number 2 and 3 teams in odds to win the MAC right now, and this would go a long way to getting there, no doubt about that. Ohio's right above them, so we'll see if they match up with them later in the season, and maybe they can really plant their flag. But this is a huge one. Puts you in perspective, puts you in a very, very good position to possibly make the MAC title, and then you win that one, you feel pretty confident. I don't think any of the teams from this conference are making the CFP, but plenty of really fun football is being played over there in the MAC. My winner is North Texas Memphis, and this one's a little bit different than I think a lot of people would look at, but Memphis has found their way back into the CFP race. It's going to have to take them running the table and look very efficient and a little bit of help here and there for them to get back in, but reality is you got one loss in the American, you absolutely are in the fight, and then you got a dangerous North Texas team coming into town. They scored 44, 52, and 41 in their last 3 games. They could cause problems for Memphis, and maybe there's a little bit of a shootout on Saturday. So a ton of really fun games in the G5, but I think this one, with all of the craziness, with all of the offense I expect to be seen, it's going to be well worth your watch. Then moving on to the Heisman race. Who can make up the most ground in the Heisman race this week? And frankly, it starts with Jalen Milroe. There's no two ways about that. He fell off quite a bit this past weekend, not playing great football against South Carolina. I don't think he's fully out of the race, but he's going to have to play pretty much lights out the rest of the way, and getting a big one in Tennessee would be absolutely massive. Frankly, that's the reason I picked Alabama in that game, was because I think he's going to have a big game. I think he's going to rise to this moment. I think he's going to play really good football, and maybe he's right back in the center of that conversation this time next week. I mean, we saw what happened with Dylan Gabriel. He got one big-time game on the national stage, and he's right. He might be number 1 in odds right now. I hope he's not, but he might be number 1 in odds right now. And then we got to talk about Travis Hunter. He can make up tons of ground just by virtue of Ashton Jeanty is not playing this week. Very much a little bit of an opening. Jeanty took full advantage. Took full advantage of when Hunter was out with I believe 186-yard performance in a half. So let's see if Travis Hunter can follow suit there. It's going to be very tough coming back from that injury, but this would be a game where if he can put on a show, then he might just be the number 1 guy, and he could very well not let go of that position. The biggest one by a mile to me is Quinn Ewers, if I'm being totally honest. Now, that game last week could have kind of taken him out of contention. You know, you miss 2 games, you then come back for a game and don't look fully crisp. Maybe that was enough, but the reality is, we saw it with Dylan Gabriel, we saw it with a number of quarterbacks. You beat Georgia at night, and you look really, really good doing it. Say he puts on a 2022 Oklahoma performance. I don't expect that to happen, but let's just say he does that. this is going to be top 3, top 5 in the odds on Monday. I can pretty much promise you that. This is a player that was probably leading it when he got injured and then went down for a couple of weeks. But if he comes back swinging this upcoming weekend, I feel like it's going to be hard for odds makers to not bump him up pretty high in that Heisman race. And then finally, the individual matchup of the week. This is something that I've really gotten to like on this segment because it's one of those things. You don't have to look at the big time. You don't have to look at the teams. You don't have to look at the coaches necessarily. Or you can look at the coaches, which we will here in a second. But you can look at the individual matchups, whether it's position on position, coach on coach, player on player. And we'll start with one, player on player. T-Mac against Travis Hunter is going to be special. It's two of the very best players in the entire country, probably the top wide receiver off the board this upcoming draft cycle in T-Mac. Maybe Luther Burden beats him out, but we'll see what happens there. And then the top cornerback off the board, although he's probably going to be the top 4 wide receiver off the board as well. So very confusing world, but at the end of the day, whenever you get to see what I would consider the second best wide receiver in the country face off what I would consider the 5th best wide receiver in the country. Whenever you get to see those two guys go against each other, weird, but very much like it. It's going to be incredible to watch that matchup, and whoever wins it could very easily win that game. The other thing I want to talk about, Kalen DeBoer against Tim Banks is going to be fascinating in that Tennessee game because you know Kalen DeBoer can do this. You know he can scheme up stuff incredibly well, probably better than just about anyone in the country. Tim Banks is no different on the other side. He's absolutely incredible, does an incredible job simulating blitzes. He does have a little bit of a susceptible back end, but that's not necessarily his fault. That's more personnel-wise. So it's going to be incredible to see this chess match go underway, and whoever wins it, very well will win this game. I can promise you that. And then we got Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart. They're going to have their hands full, and it's because the guy on the other side, Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian, obviously, are a nightmare to deal with. When you have a third-year quarterback that runs an offense that is already hard to get a beat on, even when it's not a third-year quarterback, when you have a guy that's so crisp, that's so on time pretty much every single play, the defense just has to be perfect. And even when it's perfect, sometimes you're going to get beat. You have to be able to tackle really effectively in this game. You have to be able to disguise coverages the same way Oklahoma did. A lot of things need to be done in this game to possibly stop this Texas offense because it has not been something that anyone has been able to do this year. And Georgia, while I do think I would venture to say this is the best defense they've played. I think Oklahoma might have them beat by just a hair, but at the end of the day, they're going to have their hands full, and they have to be able to execute at that ridiculously high level from a play calling perspective, or Quinn Ewers is going to eat him for dinner, be at the top of the Heisman odds, and Texas might just be running away with this conference. So a lot of things going into this week that we're going to have to be on the lookout for. Obviously, we will get to that Georgia-Texas game. We will get to a lot of the big-time ACC games, a couple of big-time, I'm missing one, Big Ten games this upcoming weekend. Tomorrow, we will cover all of those games, starting with that big-time one in Austin. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow for that Georgia-Texas breakdown.